The first thing Sergeant Marin Coyle learned about the veil was that they could hear her heartbeat from across the room, and the second thing she learned was that they expected her to scream. She did neither. She sat very still on the slab they had given her in place of a bed and watched the pale, narrow surgeon move around the lab. He had 4 arms folded against his ribs like a praying mantis at rest, and a face that was mostly eye, one wet, dark, milk-veined orb that took up the whole front of his skull. He moved without sound. The veal all moved without sound. Their corridors had a hush that crawled into the back of your throat and waited there. His name, as near as the translator could grind it down, was Senvelka, and he was a pathologist. He had told her this himself, in the careful, fluted voice they used for prisoners. He had told her many things in the 17 hours since they had pulled her out of the wreck of the dropship. He had told her about her own spine, the curvature of it, the small old fracture at L4 from a fall during basic, the way her vertebrae sat in their sleeve of muscle like coins in a stack. He had shown her the imaging on his wall. He had pointed with one of his thin gray fingers at a faint smudge between the 3rd and 4th lumbar, and he had said in that same careful voice, "There, that is where you keep it." She had not asked what. She had learned in the war that asking was a form of feeding them. Senvelka turned now from his bench and crossed to her with a tray. On the tray was a cup of water and a small folded cloth. He set them beside her with a gentleness that she had come in 17 hours to recognize as the most dangerous thing about him. The veil who wanted to hurt you stayed across the room. The veil who wanted to learn something came close and gave you water. "Drink," he said. "You have been shouting in your sleep." "I haven't been sleeping," Coyle said. "You have." He folded down onto a low stool and regarded her with that single great eye. The pupil inside it was a slit, the color of wet slate. "You shout without sound. It is a habit of your kind. You think we cannot hear it. We can." She didn't answer. She drank the water. It was warm and tasted faintly of iron, the way the water on every Veil ship tasted, as if their pipes ran through a slaughterhouse. Her hands, holding the cup, were steady. That was a thing she had practiced. You let the body do what it wanted in private, and you did not let it tell on you in public. Her grandmother had taught her that in a different language, for a different war. Coyle had been 6 years old and afraid of the priest at the funeral, and her grandmother had bent down and whispered to her, in the church porch with the rain coming down, "Your face is a curtain, love. You decide what people see through it." She had not understood at the time. She had understood later in pieces. "I have autopsied many of your soldiers," Senvelka said. "Before the truce. After the truce. The truce makes no difference to the dead, you understand. I have looked at perhaps 200 human spines now. And in everyone, at the moment of fear, the moment of greatest fear, when the body knows it is going to die, the vertebrae crack." He held up 2 fingers and snapped them apart with a small dry sound. "Like that, not from the wound, from the inside, as if something is pushing out." Coyle kept her face still. "My people have known of this for a long time," he said. "We have it ourselves. Every species we have studied has it, a small parasite, very old, that lives along the spinal cord and feeds on terror. When you are frightened, it grows. When you scream, it shrinks back. That is the bargain. The scream releases the pressure. Without the scream," he held up his fingers again, and this time he made the snap softer, almost regretful. "Without the scream, it keeps growing, until something gives." She set the cup down on the tray. "That's a hell of a story," she said. "It is not a story, Sergeant Coyle. It is biology. We harvest them from your dead. We have a use for them." He tilted his head, and the eye rolled wetly in its socket to keep her in focus. "But we have never seen one fully grown. Your kind always screams. Even the very brave ones at the end scream. It dissipates the energy. It robs us of the specimen." He stood. He gathered the tray. At the door he paused, and his voice, when it came, was almost kind. "I am told you do not scream," he said. "I am told this is why they sent you." Then he left, and the lock made its small, definitive sound, and Coyle sat in the hush of the Veil ship and felt, for the first time, the cold thing she had been refusing to feel since they pulled her out of the wreck. They had not captured her by accident. Someone had sold her. She had been a field medic for 11 years. The first 6 on Earth, in the tail end of the African resource wars. The last 5 out here, on the long, ragged front where the Veil pushed and humanity pushed back. She had carried boys with their guts in their hands. She had held a corporal named Diaz while he died of a punctured lung, and she had not let him hear her cry, because he was 19 and frightened, and her job was to be the last calm thing he ever knew. She had learned, somewhere in those 11 years, that her voice was a tool she could put down, that the scream the body wanted, the scream the throat wanted, was not the only answer to pain. You could swallow it. You could fold it small and put it under your tongue and keep going. She had not known until now that the Veil knew this about her, that somewhere in the long quiet war, someone had written it down. There was a file on her, on this ship, in a server somewhere behind these pale bone-colored walls. The file said, "This one does not scream." The file said, "Send for her." The file said, "Try her." She wondered who had written it. She had her suspicions. There had been a doctor at the rehabilitation center on Ceres, after Tarsus, a soft-handed civilian named Reller, who had asked her a great many questions and made notes she had not been allowed to see. Reller had asked her about Diaz. Reller had asked her, more than once, about the humming. Coyle had thought at the time that he was bad at his job. She thought now that he had been very good at it, and that the job had not been the one printed on his door. She did not let her face show any of this. Her face was a curtain. She let the curtain hang. The cell was a hexagon, 6 pale walls the color of old bone, no windows, a slab, a basin, a drain. The light came from everywhere at once and cast no shadow. There was a small mirror over the basin. A courtesy, she supposed, or an insult, and in it she could see her own face, narrow and brown and tired, her hair shaved down to gray stubble where they had pulled the helmet off her, a small cut above her eyebrow that was already scabbing. She did not look afraid. That was the thing. She looked very tired and very still, and the eyes in the mirror were the eyes of someone who had decided something a long time ago. She put her tongue against the back of her teeth and waited. The first thing they tried was the basin. She woke. She had slept after all in the end, the body taking what it needed, and the small basin in the corner of her cell was full of blood. It was not blood. She understood that within a second. The cell was still the same washed bone color, the walls still the same hush, but the basin, alone in all that pale geometry, was full to the brim with bright arterial red. The tap above it was running. The red came out of the tap in a thin, steady cord, and the basin did not overflow, which meant the drain was open, and the red was going somewhere, and somewhere on this ship was a tank of the stuff, and a pump and a Vel who had thought, very carefully, about exactly which shade. Coyle sat up slowly. She had seen a lot of blood. She had seen a corporal's blood pumping out of his femoral in spurts she could time by her own pulse. She had seen a child's blood pooled under a kitchen table in Mombasa. The thing in the basin was not blood. It was an idea of blood, and the idea was meant for her. She got up. She walked to the basin. She looked down into the red. A hand came out of it. It came out slowly, the way a hand comes out of water in a dream. Fingers first, and then the wrist, and then the forearm, dripping. It was a human hand. Pale, female, the nails cut short the way a medic cuts them. The hand reached up toward her face. Coyle watched it. She watched the fingers flex. She watched a single drop of red detach from the knuckle and fall back into the basin, where it made no ripple, because the red in the basin was not liquid the way water was liquid. It was something else. Something the Veil had cooked up in a vat. Something that behaved almost right, but not quite. She watched the hand reach for her cheek. She did not flinch. She reached out, her own hand, scarred at the second knuckle from a piece of shrapnel in '63, ring finger crooked from a break that hadn't set right, and she took the hand by the wrist. She squeezed. The skin gave the way a glove gives. Underneath it, she could feel the small, hard articulations of a Veil manipulator arm. She had been right. She held the wrist a moment longer, very gently, the way she would have held the wrist of one of her boys, and then she let go. "Hello," she said to the basin, in a low, even voice. "I see you." The hand sank back into the red. The tap kept running for another moment and then stopped. The red began to drain, slow and reluctant, until the basin was empty and pale again, and there was only a faint pink stain at the bottom where some of the dye had settled. A small click in the wall, almost a sigh. The hidden camera adjusting. Coyle went back to her slab and sat down. Her hands were shaking. She put them between her knees and waited for them to stop. She did not scream. She did not weep. But she let herself, in the privacy of her own skull, name what was happening. They were trying to grow something inside her. Senvel Ka had told her so. They were going to keep frightening her, in small, careful increments, until the thing along her spine reached its full size, and then they were going to open her up and take it out and use it. She did not know what they used it for. She suspected she did not want to know. She also suspected, and this was the colder thought, the thought she had been circling since the lock had clicked, that they could not finish the job unless she screamed. That was what Senvil-Ka had said. Without the scream, it keeps growing. They were going to keep going until she broke. And if she did not break, the thing inside her would grow past what they had ever harvested before, and they would have to take it out alive. And what they would do with that... She put her tongue against the back of her teeth. She decided she was not going to scream. Senvil-Ka came back 4 hours later, by her count. The veal did not run on human time, but she had a watch in her head, the kind a medic builds out of pulse and breath, and she had been counting. He had brought another tray. On the tray was a syringe. "This will be unpleasant," he said. He set the tray down on the bench. He did not look at her. The veil, she had begun to notice, looked away from you when they were about to do something they considered beneath them. It was the closest thing they had to shame. "I would like to tell you that it will be over quickly. It will not. The compound is one we have synthesized from a plant on your world. You may know it by the name lysergic. We have refined it. It is somewhat stronger than what your scientists worked with. You're going to drug me." "I am going to give you a tour," he said. "Of your own fear." She looked at the syringe. She looked at the forearms folded against his ribs. She thought, very briefly, about going for him, about the small bones of his throat, about the wet eye. And then she thought about the 4 guards she had seen in the corridor and the locked door and the fact that she was on a ship in the deep dark and there was nowhere to run. She held out her arm. "On the other side," she said. "The veins are better." He paused. The great eye rolled to look at her. For the first time since she had met him, she thought she saw something behind it that was not quite curiosity. "You are not afraid of the needle," he said. "I'm a medic," she said. "I've stuck 1,000 of these in 1,000 arms. The needle isn't the part that scares anybody." "What is the part?" She looked at him. "Not knowing what's in it," she said. He almost smiled. She could not have said how she knew with that face, but she knew. He turned her arm over and found the vein and slid the needle home with a gentleness that was, again, the most dangerous thing about him. "Lysergic," he said, "and something else. Something of ours. It will help you see what your fear looks like from the outside." He depressed the plunger. For a long time nothing happened. Then the walls began to breathe. She watched them, very calmly, do it. The pale bone-colored hexagon was inhaling and exhaling. The corners drew in toward her, and the corners drew back. She could feel the air thicken, the way it thickens before a storm, on the savannah, and she could feel her own pulse start to climb, and she put her tongue against the back of her teeth and named what was happening. "The drug," she told herself. "Just the drug. Your visual cortex is being given bad data. Your amygdala is being lit up. The fear is a chemical. It is not a real thing. It is only your body responding to a molecule." The walls closed in another inch. The light, which had been everywhere at once, began to gather itself. It pulled into the corners. It pulled into the seams. The hexagon was no longer a hexagon. It had grown ribs. The pale walls flexing inward like the inside of a chest cavity, and she was in the chest of a thing that was breathing, and the breathing was getting faster. A skeleton walked out of the wall. It was a human skeleton. She recognized it the way you recognize a face in a photograph. Not all at once, but in pieces. The shape of the skull. The set of the shoulders. The small old fracture at L4. It was her skeleton. It walked out of the wall and across the floor of the cell with a small dry clicking sound. And it sat down on the slab beside her, and it turned the empty sockets toward her face. It opened its jaw. It did not say anything. It just opened its jaw and held it open, the way a person holds their mouth open at the dentist, and Coyle understood with a sudden cold clarity what it wanted. It wanted her to scream into it. It wanted her to fill the hollow up. The thing inside her spine. She could feel it now. She could feel it for the first time. A small hot weight at the base of her back, the size of a thumb and growing, wanted out, and the skeleton was there to receive it, and all she had to do was open her mouth and let go. Senvil-Ka was watching her on a screen somewhere. She knew that. She knew there were sensors in the slab beneath her, in the air, in the light. They were measuring her heart and her breath and the electrical conductivity of her skin. They were graphing the thing along her spine. Somewhere in a comfortable chair he was leaning forward, his single great eye fixed on the readout, watching the line climb. She closed her eyes. When she closed her eyes, it got worse. There were faces inside her eyelids. There was Diaz, the boy with the punctured lung, and his mouth was working, but no sound was coming out. There was her mother, in the kitchen on the morning Marin had left for basic, holding a dish towel and not crying. There was a VL child she had once seen in a refugee column on Tarsus the Fee. with its single eye milk white from blast cataract, and the child had been holding the hand of its dead parent, and the child had not been making any sound either. She opened her eyes. The walls were inches from her face. She could feel them. They had a temperature. They had a smell, like wet stone. They were going to crush her, slowly, while the thing inside her spine grew and grew, and Senvelka was going to watch on his screen and take notes. And at the very end, she was going to open her mouth and let it out. The big scream, the one she had been holding since she was 19 years old, and the parasite would calcify and they would have her. She put her tongue against the back of her teeth. She thought about Diaz, about the way she had held his hand and hummed. She had hummed a tune her mother used to hum, a thing with no words, an Irish thing from her grandmother. She had hummed it into Diaz's ear for 40 minutes while he died, and she had not cried until afterwards in the latrine, with the water running so no one could hear. She started to hum it now. She did not open her mouth. She closed her teeth and let the sound vibrate in her sinuses, a small, thin, private thing, more felt than heard. It was barely a sound at all. It was the ghost of a sound. It was the sound a person makes when they have decided that the scream is not for the room. She hummed her grandmother's tune. The walls hesitated. It was the strangest thing. She felt them hesitate. The pressure on the air slackened by a hair. The faces behind her eyes blurred. The pulse in her throat, which had been climbing, found a small step and stood on it. She hummed. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, the yellow linoleum, the smell of bread, the way her grandmother had said, once, when Maren was very small and afraid of a thunderstorm, "You don't have to scream at it, love. You just have to outlast it. The thunder always runs out of breath before you do," she hummed. When she opened her eyes again, the walls were where they had always been. The light was the light. The hexagon was a hexagon. Her arm where the needle had gone in was throbbing dully, and she was soaked through with sweat, and she was alive, and she had not made a sound. In the wall, very faintly, she heard a click. The camera, adjusting. Senvelka did not come back for a long time after that. She counted it at 14 hours. She slept badly. She drank from the basin, because there was no other water, and the basin was clean now, and the water tasted of iron, the way it always did. She did push-ups on the floor of the cell to keep her body remembering what it was. She thought about her mother. She thought about Diaz. She thought, with a cold, small precision, about what she was going to do. When the door finally opened, it was not Senvelka. It was a guard, a young one by the look. The carapace at his shoulders was still soft, still gray rather than black. He had a stunner on his belt and the small ceremonial blade the Veil all wore, a thing about the length of her forearm, curved like a question mark. He came into the cell, and he did not look at her. He set down a tray with food on it, a paste, gray-green, that she had been eating for 2 days, and he turned to go. "Wait," Coyle said. He paused. She did not know how much of her language he had. The translators were embedded in the senior Veil. The guards mostly worked off gestures and tone. She kept her voice very low and very even. "You're young," she said. "Are you afraid of me?" He turned, the single eye fixed on her. He said something in the fluted Veil tongue, sharp and short, and she did not need a translator to understand the shape of it. He was telling her to be silent. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. "I just want to know. Are you afraid of me?" The eye blinked. The membrane slid across it and back. "They told you I don't scream," she said. "Didn't they? They told you the human in cell 6 doesn't scream. They told you to be careful. They told you something was growing inside her, and nobody was sure how big it would get." He took a half step back toward the door. "It's all right," she said softly. "I'm not going to do anything." She got up from the slab, very slowly. She held her hands out, palms open, the way you approach a frightened animal. She was a small woman. He was taller than she was by a head. She moved the way she had moved 1,000 times toward wounded boys. "I just want to ask you a question," she said, "about your people, about the parasite. Is it true that you have it too?" He said something. The translator in the wall, which had been silent, woke up and rendered it for her in a small, flat voice. "I am not authorized to answer." "That's all right," she said. "You don't have to answer. I'm just curious, because I think you do have it, and I think yours is bigger than ours. I think your whole species is afraid all the time, in a way mine isn't. I think that's why you study us. I think you're trying to figure out how we put it down." The eye rolled. "How did you guess that, Sergeant?" said the translator, flat and small, repeating his words. "Because of the way you walk," she said. "All of you. So quiet. Quiet like prey, not like predators. Quiet like something that's been listening for a footstep for a long, long time." He was very still. She was a step away from him now. She could smell him. The veil smelled. Up close, like whetstone and ozone. She could see the place where the soft new carapace met the older plate at his throat. She could see the strap of the stunner. "It's okay," she said. "I know, it's okay." She hummed very softly 2 notes of her grandmother's tune. He flinched. It was a tiny flinch, just a tightening of the shoulders, just the membrane sliding down over the eye for a fraction of a second longer than usual. But she saw it. She had spent 11 years learning to read the moment a body decides it is going to be afraid, and she saw it. She hummed again. He took a step back. "You hear it," she whispered. "Don't you? The thing inside you. It's hearing it." His hand went to the stunner. She moved. She was a small woman, and he was a veal, but she had 11 years of triage, and she knew exactly where the carapace was thin. She went under his arm, and she took the curved blade from his belt, and she came up behind him with her left arm around his throat. The wrong way for a human, but the right way for a veil, against the soft chimney where they took in air. And she put the point of the blade against the small soft place between his second and third vertebrae, the place where, if he had a parasite, the parasite would be. She did not press. "Quiet," she breathed into the side of his head. "You don't scream, I don't push. You scream, I push. Do we understand each other?" The translator faintly, "Yes." "Good," she said. "Walk." What happened in the corridor took a little under 3 minutes. She did not kill him. She wanted to, and she did not. She made him walk her to the control nexus on the lab deck, and she made him open the door with his palm print, and then she put him to sleep with his own stunner, set low, the way a medic would. She left him breathing in the corridor. She had been on a Vil ship before, briefly, as a prisoner of an earlier war. She knew the architecture. The lab deck connected to the medical bay connected to the specimen storage, and the specimen storage was where Senvel Ka would have put the things he had grown. She found him there. He was alone in a long, low room full of glass tanks. The tanks were lit from beneath. In each tank floated something pale and segmented, the color of an old bruise about the length of her forearm. They moved. They moved slowly, the way deep-sea things move, and they had small, wet hooks at one end and a faint suggestion of a face at the other. And when she walked into the room, every single one of them turned to look at her. Senvelka had his back to her. He was making a note on a screen. He said, without turning, in the careful, fluted voice, "Sergeant Coyle, I was just about to come and see you." "I know," she said. He turned. He saw the blade in her hand. He saw the stunner on her hip. He saw, she thought, the thing in her face that was not fear, and his single great eye widened a fraction, and the 4 arms uncrossed from his ribs and hung at his sides. "You came here alone," he said. "Yes. That is interesting. I would have expected you to try to reach the escape pods." "I might still," she said. "I haven't decided." He looked at her for a long moment. "You did not scream," he said, "during the lysergic. We watched. You did something else. You hummed. We have no protocol for hummed." "It's a song my grandmother sang," she said. "What does it mean?" "It doesn't mean anything. It's just a song." He blinked slowly, the membrane sliding down and up. "Sergeant Coyle," he said, "may I ask you something? You can ask. Are you not afraid? Even now," she thought about that. "I'm afraid," she said. "Of course I'm afraid. I've been afraid for 17 years. I was afraid in Mombasa, and I was afraid on Tarsus, and I was afraid when you stuck the needle in my arm. I'm afraid right now. My hands are sweating. My heart is going about 140. Fear is a chemical. Fear is just a chemical." "Then why?" "Because I'm not going to give it to you," she said. She crossed to the nearest tank. The thing inside it turned its small wet face to track her. She looked at it for a moment. This pale segmented thing, the veil had grown out of 200 dead human spines, and she felt something very cold and very clean settle inside her. "How many of these have you made?" she said. 41. "And what do you do with them?" He hesitated. "We feed them," he said. "To what?" He did not answer. She turned to look at him. She was still very calm. She had been calm for 17 hours, and she could be calm for the rest of her life if she had to. "To what, Senenvolka?" "To ourselves," he said quietly. "It is a ritual. Our young ones, when they come of age, they consume one. It is said to make them brave, to put down the parasite in their own spines. We have always grown them from the dead. Yours grow large because you are magnificent at fear. You feel it well. You feel it cleanly. The other species we tried, their fear is muddy. Yours pure." She stared at him. She did know what she had expected, but it had not been that. "You eat them," she said, "to stop being afraid. And it works. For a little while." She started to laugh. She could not help it. It came up out of her, and it was a thin, tired laugh, more breath than sound. But it was the first noise she had made in 17 hours that was not a hum. And Senvolka actually took a step back from her. "Oh, you sad bastard," she said. "Oh, you poor sad bastard. You eat our fear to put down your own. That's what this whole war is. You're not conquering us. You're feeding." "Sergeant, how many ships?" she said. "How many of these tanks?" "Across your whole fleet," he did not answer. "How many?" "Thousands," he said. She nodded slowly. She walked to the central console of the specimen room. She did not know Veal script, but she had been in enough labs to know the shape of a containment system and the shape of a release. The big red. Well, the big yellow. For the Veil, there were two of them, recessed under a guard. She put the point of the blade under the guard, and she levered it up. "Sergeant Coyle," said Senvelka. His voice had gone very quiet. "Please consider what you are about to do." "I'm considering it. Those specimens, if released, will not distinguish between Veil and human. They feed on fear. They will go to whatever is most afraid on this ship." "Yes," she said, "that will include you." "Yes." He stared at her. "You do not understand," he said, and there was something in his voice she had not heard before. A thinness, the first hairline crack. When the parasite is grown, when it is at full size, and there is no scream to release it, it will burrow, it will find a host, it will use the host. "Sergeant, please. We have studied these things for 900 years. You do not know what you are about to." "I know what I'm about to do," she said. She pressed both palms down on the yellow plates. The tanks hissed. All 41 of them at once, a long, low sound like a held breath letting go. Seals on the lids unspooled. The pale things inside began to move, slowly at first, the way deep-sea things move, and then with a sudden, terrible quickness as they realized the water was leaving and the air was coming in. Senvolka backed against the wall. "Sergeant, don't scream," she said gently. "It only feeds them." She walked past him. She walked out of the specimen room. She closed the door behind her, and she heard, through the door, the first wet skittering of 41 pale, segmented things hitting the floor. She did not hear Senvelka scream. Not yet. He was, after all, a scientist. He was a brave Veil. He would last a little while. She put her tongue against the back of her teeth, and she walked toward the escape pods. And behind her, somewhere in the ship, the first alarms began to sound, and she could hear, faintly, through the bulkheads, the first thin, fluted Veil voice, very far away, lifting up into something that the translators had never bothered to learn the word for, because the Veil had never made the sound before, not in 900 years, not in front of their prisoners, not in front of anyone. It was a scream. It was followed, within a few seconds, by another, and then a fourth, somewhere closer, a young one, the soft new carapace at the shoulders not yet hardened. She did not stop walking. The corridor curved. The lights, which had been the soft, steady amber of a Veil ship at ease, began to pulse. First slow, then quick, the color of a wound. She passed a viewing port, and through it she saw, on the deck below, a Veil crewman running. He was running away from something she could not see. He was running with all four arms tucked tight against his ribs, and his great single eye open so wide she could see the white all the way around the pupil. And he was screaming, and the thing that came after him moved low and fast along the floor, segmented and pale, and it caught him at the doorway, and she did not watch what happened next. She walked on. She passed another guard, a senior one this time, the carapace at his shoulders black with age. He was standing in the middle of the corridor with his stunner drawn, and his arms shaking. He saw her. He raised the stunner. He opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. He held the stunner on her. "I'm not the one you're afraid of," she said. "Listen." He listened. He could not help listening. The screaming was everywhere now, ahead and behind, above and below, the whole ship saying the word it had spent 900 years swallowing. "They're coming," she said softly. 41 of them. They'll find you. They go to whatever is most afraid, and right now on this ship, that's you." The stunner dipped. "Run," she said. He ran. He did not run toward her, and he did not run away from her. He ran sideways into a maintenance shaft, and she heard the hatch slam behind him, and she heard, a little while later, the sound of him crying inside it, a thin, fluted, broken sound, and she heard, she could not help hearing, the wet skittering coming up the shaft to find him. She kept walking. She found the pod bay. She found a pod. She climbed in. She thought, as she sealed the hatch, of her grandmother's kitchen. The yellow linoleum, the smell of bread, the thunder, running out of breath before you did. The pod kicked free of the ship with a hard, small jolt, and through the porthole she saw the long, pale belly of the Veil cruiser receding into the dark, and she saw, here and there along its length, the lights in the windows beginning to go out, one by one, as the things she had grown for them moved through their corridors, finding whatever was most afraid. For a long moment she just watched. The ship from outside was very beautiful. She had never seen one from outside before. It had the long curved spine of a deep-sea fish, and the lights along its flank were the color of the lights in her grandmother's kitchen. At night, the soft amber lights her grandmother had left on for her when she was small and afraid of the dark. She thought about that. She thought about how 900 years ago some Vel child had been afraid in the dark too, and someone had left a light on. And somewhere between then and now her species had decided that the answer to fear was to eat it. The lights went on going out. She did not watch for long. She turned away from the porthole. She set the pod's distress beacon to the human frequency. She lay back in the harness, and she closed her eyes. For the first time in 17 hours, she let her tongue come away from the back of her teeth. She felt the small loosening in her jaw. She felt the air come into her chest in a way it had not come in for a very long time. She did not scream. She hummed, very softly, 2 notes of her grandmother's tune, and then a third, and then the whole of it, low and steady and private, into the small warm dark of the pod, and she wrote it home.